Amazing human resources professional and a great person working with us. Her name is Noralina Harville. Noralina is our operations director here at 0 to 5 Montana. She's got an incredible resume behind her. Here she oversees all of our operations and ensures that we're basically all in line. She does all of our human resources and things like that for us. She provides oversight for our internal operations, including human resources, finance, legal and governance, and she does our IT infrastructure as well. Lena comes to us with lots of experience. She has her master's in finance and accounting and 15 plus years in leadership experience, focused on delicate balance of talent management and driving positive business outcomes. And she is also in the Society of Human Resources Certified Professionals, SHRM. So if you wouldn't mind giving me a big welcome to Lena to talk to us today about conflict resolution. Thanks, Lena.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for hopefully an interesting topic, but not necessarily fun and exciting, right? So I'm going to share my screen, and everybody can just give me a thumbs up that you can see it. That look good, Kendra?
Yep, you look great, Lena.
Okay. All right, conflict resolution. As we start, I wanted to share this quote that I came across from Louis Brandeis. As you look at it, I'm sure how many of you would initially view conflict as potentially positive? Probably not, but it would be hard to think of conflict to be positive, especially depending on your tolerance level to it. But when it is effectively managed, the outcome can be positive. So hopefully I can convince you of that today. So on our agenda, again, I hope I gave you some tips on navigating conflict, as well as encourage you that conflict can have positive outcomes. And you'll see here that there can be growth from effective conflict resolution. The resolution can be a way of progress. And really, at the end of the day, positive working relationships are critical. So as I approach conflict resolution today, it'll be more of the lens in the work setting, but I believe you'll see a lot of these tips can be applicable even in a personal type setting. So the key here is a conflict is no more than a heated negotiation. And if you look at it in that perspective, the key is, just as with any negotiation, is finding a resolution that satisfies all the parties involved. So your most powerful tools are the ability to use assertive listening skills and the ability to remain objective. I have set aside some time toward the end, so if you have any questions and comments, I'd love to hear that as well as we start to go through the material. So I wanted to focus in on what the 4 most common sources of conflict that lead to disagreements. Conflict is inevitable. Interpersonal conflict occurs when there are real or perceived incompatible goals, when there's scarce resources or opposing viewpoints. This conflict can range anywhere from subtle nonverbal cues, like the cold shoulder, to obvious blowouts. I do want to note that it's important that conflict is distinct from interpersonal violence, which that includes abuse. Conflict is a natural part of relationships, but how we handle it matters more than its mere presence. So we'll start to go through these 4 core, but I just want to kind of give some highlights to each one. First one being communication problems. Sometimes conflict arises simply out of a small unintentional communication problem, such as lost emails or dealing with people who don't return phone calls. This can also happen when giving feedback. It is also a case in which the best intentions can quickly escalate to a negative situation when the communication or delivery went wrong. Then we have personality differences. And this is because not everyone thinks the same way we do. There will be differences of opinions. Then we have differences in objective. This is the what. A conflict exists when individual objectives contradict each other. And then we have the difference in the approach. This is the how to do something or approach it. And this conflict is usually due to work styles because team members have different preferences on how they accomplish tasks. So let's dig a little deeper into each one. I want to start with the fourth one, and that is difference in the approach, the how. As I mentioned, this is work style conflicts usually occur because team members have a different preferences on how to accomplish tasks. Some of the contributors to this type of conflict is some people work quickly and move on to the next task as soon as possible, while others prefer to complete tasks slowly and mindfully. Then you have situations where people are self-starters who require little to no direction to finish a task, and yet others need guidance every step of the way. And then the reality is there can be multiple ways to and processes to accomplish the end result. However, based on work styles, this can be a roadblock to progress or completion. So one thing to just be aware of for yourself is taking the viewpoint of my way is only or the right way. This can also be a contributor to that can lead to disagreements. So what's the best way to avoid or minimize this type of conflict? Well, first is to recognize that everyone's work style is different, and then find ways to collaborate to achieve the same goal despite those differences. And you want to be open to listening and considering the various options or approaches. I want to share this quote from Dean Rusk, which I think really helps to highlight this area. Is the best way to persuade others is with your ears by listening to them. Next, we're going to go to the differences in objectives. So this conflict of objectives exists when individual objectives contradict each other and part of the whole and cannot be fully achieved as a result. In other words, there are competing relationships between the goals, and this can also be referred to as goal rivalry. This type of conflict is more challenging than the prior one when it comes to approaches, since there's a disagreement on what the goal or final objective that needs to be achieved. Some of the issues that contribute to this is number one is goal rivalry and competition. And this causes pride to rise up in individuals or even groups. And one thing I always think about this as an equation is a prideful individual plus another prideful individual. It's going to equal conflict and competition. Yeah. So the disagreement here is between the battle of the wills, and each party may have a tendency to be the knower or always being right. And because of this, people or individuals that don't agree or in this conflict start armoring up and they become defensive and there's posturing. And worst of all, it becomes a huge driver to just talk to be heard. Everybody's competing to make sure their voice is known. So ways to avoid this or overcome this type of conflict, I want to share 3 different tips here. The first one is name the issue. This may be a tough conversation. And one thing in the book, Crucial Conversation, it centers on it's important to have a crucial conversation when you have opposing positions, high emotions, and high stakes. And it's critical to have that maybe hard conversation, and high stakes may mean a fractured working relationship. And in this case, a difference of objectives can be a roadblock from moving forward. The second tip for this area to hopefully mitigate or minimize is making learning curiosity skills a priority. I want to share an example of how this would look when you start a crucial conversation to encourage the learning curiosity skill. So when we talked about before about always wanting to be heard and there's competing interests and pride rises up, here's kind of I want to kind of share maybe a conversation to help illustrate this. So let's say you're the leader and you're seeing this with a team member. This can be your approach to that. Is I'd like for you to work on your curiosity and critical thinking skills. You're often quick with answers, which can be helpful, but not as helpful as having the right questions, which is how you'll grow. And again, as a leader, and we'll even talk about this in performance management next week, is coaching and feedback is really important and critical to support your team members. And I think even for ourselves to receive that. And I think the third tip I want to share is acknowledge and provide positive feedback when there is curiosity, when there are great questions being asked, because that's the way to work toward collaboration on meeting a unified objective. Then we have personality differences. And of all the 4 common sources that are shared, this really can be the underlying or root cause of the disagreement or conflict. If you've taken the DISC personality assessment, then you may be familiar with the 4 different personality quadrants. If you haven't, that's okay, because I'll summarize these 4 quadrants and show you how this can contribute to this disagreement. And also how the personality differences can manifest in a conflict, as well as help you provide an understanding how these differences are to avoid or mitigate potential conflicts. So let's walk through this acronym. It's DISC or DISC, and the first one being D is dominance. This type of personality places emphasis on accomplishing results. The traits to this personality are they're confident, sometimes blunt, outspoken, and demanding. And then you have I, and that's influence. This personality places emphasis on influencing or persuading others. The traits of this personality is they're enthusiastic, they're optimistic, they're open, they're trusting, they're energetic. And then you have S for steadiness. This personality emphasis is on cooperation, sincerity, loyalty, dependability. The traits in this is they tend to be calm, have a deliberate disposition, and they don't like being rushed. And then you have C, conscientiousness. This personality places emphasis on quality and accuracy, expertise, and competency. The traits on this personality is they enjoy independence, demand details, and often fear being wrong. And if you think of those 4 personalities, you can see how conflict can arise just even in misunderstandings between those different personalities. So personality difference among coworkers are due to the fundamental difference among the way people think and act. We can better understand how others see the world by understanding what their personality types are. Knowing these differences are natural and normal, let us anticipate and mitigate these internal personal conflicts. It's not often about you, but simply a different way of seeing and behaving. One thing I do want to point out in this particular area, especially for leadership, is these personality differences can be a pitfall for leaders. And one area is poor leadership. And what I mean by that, it can be a personality difference between you as a leader or staff member, or if you're seeing the conflict between staff members and not taking the initiative to help facilitate resolution to that. The other thing is if you fall into this pitfall, there's a potential for inequitable or discriminatory treatment among staff. Sometimes we're all human nature inclined to maybe have preference to somebody who has same personality type as you, think like you. So just want to bring that out to be aware of. And also this can be a pitfall of insufficient training of staff. I've experienced where there might be a supervisor who may be that dominance personality, and maybe because I have some finance in me, I'm a little more methodical. Well, they want to rush through the training and not allow for maybe somebody like my personality to take notes. And then that can result into insufficient training. And then there's a lack of opportunity for staff. This is a common area for preventing growth or providing challenging projects to a staff member. When you have somebody who is really takes a self-starter, maybe a supervisor who's more of a steadiness personality may hold back on providing growth opportunities for somebody who may be interested. And the other piece of this that may be a pitfall, it can potentially be unhealthy competition among staff. So being aware of those personality types and making sure that that's on your radar. And this next part is going to be communication. So as I mentioned, sometimes conflict arises simply out of just small unintentional communication. And then it can also come from giving feedback that just went not the way that you intended. The feedback may have not been received well, or it was delivered poorly. But one thing to just be aware of under communication problems that can occur is that negative patterns of communication can indeed lead to conflict. When conflict is an inevitable part of working and close relationships, it doesn't always have to be negative or unproductive. So let's talk a little bit more about negative patterns of communication. So that's on, you're aware of that and be able to hopefully mitigate those issues. So negative communication can exacerbate conflict. So here's some examples. Ignoring somebody. You're not even having communication. But this can be a negative pattern of communication. This passive approach can escalate tension. And then there's the passive aggressive, the veiled or indirect hostility can lead to frustration. And then of course, the most obvious is blowing up. Expressing anger impulsively can strain relationships. These patterns create valid negative emotions like guilt or anger, but they do need to be addressed. You know, this is an area that is continuously a daily work in progress for everyone. I find myself always having to think about this, and then when I have a setback, reflecting back on what happened there. So we can all fall short. So when it does happen, I think the most important thing is to be courageous and repair the situation. And because of that, it does help to build trust. And finally, in this area of communication, I just want to encourage you to focus on the behavior and its effects, not on the person. So in the center of all of this, I wanted to share that trust is the foundation of building positive working relationships and to work through conflict. And just a few things is the most important thing is to get to the root of what this is. Do some self-reflection, use empathetic listening, ask questions, try to uncover what seems to be the issues contributing to this disagreement. And then the last thing is to overcome the feeling that this is a personal attack. Separate yourself from the feedback, look at the facts. And I did want to kind of give a 6-step approach, positive conflict resolution. First one being identify and specify the problem. Again, separate facts from opinions. And then make sure everyone agrees on one version of the facts. Identify the goals. What are we trying to accomplish with this situation? And you want to generate alternate solutions. This is a great time to brainstorm, listen to each other, be open to feedback. Then come together collaboratively and evaluate alternatives and make a decision. Set the standards, what's the agreement as far as what and what the action plan is and how and measuring that outcome. And then 6, set a day to review, circle back, see how it went, what went well, so that can continue and maybe the next project or objective, and what didn't go so well, what can everybody work on. So with that, what I want to ask all of you as we conclude, what one thing will you either start doing or stop doing today? This is a lifelong practice. So you're never going to get it exactly right. I don't either, but I think you learn and grow each and every time. Does anybody have any questions?
We're opening this up to everyone out there. You get to ask an expert. I'm going to just start this topic off on this. What would you start and stop doing? Lena, thank you so much for that 6-step approach. I've done a lot of leadership trainings and stuff, but to really think of it for me to think of it in a task that I can look at is really helpful. But I loved that number 6 step, that set a day to review. Usually I try to do it like right in the minute, and that does not always bode as productive for me. And so that's something that I'm absolutely going to do is like, I'm just going to set a time to come back to this and to take a look at it. So I really appreciated that. Like to hear from other people. So Dawn, you're so good at contributing. I would love to hear from you.
Well, how'd you know I was going to talk? I was going to say that with my past experience in employees this year alone, I have learned to put myself in that employee's shoes and like rethink how I do things, rethink where they're coming from. And I mean, you don't need to be their friend, but you do need to understand like, you know, how they think and how they process things. I mean, I didn't even know that there was a conflict in my daycare when I had the one walk out. Like, I didn't know there was a problem. And so the other employee and I, you know, we talked about things, and like, you know, from that point forward, we made sure that we were all on the same page at all times. And I think that really helped. So, but yeah, it is, I was waiting for this, for this class. Because I know conflict resolution.
Well, you bring up such a good point, because sometimes as the leader, we don't see unless we are putting ourselves in that spot, right?
Well, and what was crazy is I was physically here, but I didn't know that there was a problem, but I was stuck on the couch. I was stuck upstairs where the playroom was downstairs. They were outside. They were having lunch. You know, I was there, but I wasn't. So, I mean, yeah, it was like literally under my nose.
Yeah, that makes it tough.
So, but I do think like, you know, all these little classes and especially like this one today, you can take and just like reset your brain so that when I do go forward with more staff, you started on the right foot.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Dawn.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's hear from someone else in the group. One thing that you will start or stop doing as a result of this training today.
One of the things that I thought about is we all tend to make assumptions about where somebody's coming from.
Mhm.
And when we're talking about conflict, that often puts us in a bad spot. We're assuming motive when there really isn't a motive to be assumed. So that's something that I work on constantly, just making sure that I'm not assuming, making those assumptions about motive.
Yeah, Tammy, I totally agree. And sometimes we have those entire conversations in our head that we've completely made up that didn't even exist, right? I love it.
And Tammy, I
Anyone
think,
else have a question for Lena? I do want to just reiterate to you, thank you for all who were trying to be on last week. We apologize for the Zoom issue, but Lena is going to be our speaker next week as well. And she's going to do the topic of performance management. And we're very excited and blessed to have her, but just remember that there's no break in between the two. So I want to open it up for questions. And if there are no questions, I am going to share my screen here really quick. And just remind all of you that if you haven't already done so, sign up for our newsletter. This is where you can get all things that are happening in childcare. All the great stuff that's out there. We do our best. If you have something you need us to put out there, please make sure that you do so. Connect with us on all the socials. We do follow and post lots of things on all of our socials. And then here is our survey. And again, thank you for those of you who take the time to snap this picture. Please grab your phone and snap this QR code. Let us know. Specifically, there's a box in there where you can tell us about trainings you'd like to see in the future. And we'd like to know where are the needs out there in the state and what do you want to hear about and what we can do. And with that, I'd like to say, Lena, thank you so much. Do you have any parting words of wisdom for us?
I don't, but I want to thank everybody for joining, and come back next week because we'll talk about feedback and maybe help get in front of potential conflicts.
That's great. Well, we just want to say thank you to everyone, and we'll see you absolutely next week. No pause in between them this time. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.